Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. In any state capital, there are those key power brokers that work behind the scenes to get things done. Often they're only known by those in the know. Our guest is John Howard. He's the editor of Capital Weekly, a well-read publication in the state capital that annually produces a top 100 most influential folks in California. Welcome to the Maddy Report, John.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm happy to be here.
So, your state this year was quite the roller coaster. You thought that was the best term to describe what was going on this year, from the pandemic to the recall and everything else that was going on. How did that impact what you did in terms of putting the list together this year?
Well, it really did affect it. Both of those issues affected the top 100 list. In terms of the pandemic, of course, we were not able to talk to people directly like we usually do in restaurants and coffee shops and schmooze places. We were all hiding in our rooms. And so a lot of this was done via telephone, email, even Zoom. And there's a difference when you do it that way as opposed to sitting down and chatting with someone. So that was one big difference. As far as the recall goes, the top 100 is pretty situational, and the recall dominated a lot of the coverage. Rightly or wrongly, it did. And so the list reflected that. It's interesting though, when we look at your list this year compared to last year. Some names are added, some are dropped. Typical, having labor is well represented, so are other special interest lobby groups. But what I noticed about this year's list was a much stronger representation of women in the top 10. 7 of the top 10 are women, and a very strong representation of members of the governor's administration, his cabinet. What are the takeaways? Is this just the Newsom administration settling in? I think that's part of it. The top 100 list, especially the top 10 or 15, it's kind of like a pond. The Capitol is like a pond, and you throw a stone in and it ripples. You see the ripples come out. Well, in the Capitol, the ripples come out from the governor's office. So the personnel that he appoints to run the inner sanctum in there typically get a good showing on the list. This time there are lots of women. Last couple of years, I think we've had a preponderance of women in the top 10. We certainly have had the women as number one. A woman is number one for years. This is the first time in many, many years. I think first time I can remember we've had a man as the number one. That was Jim.
Yeah. Any of those of us who are married know that women run the world. So no surprise there. Let me ask you this though. You've got this top 10 we're going to talk about, but do you want to talk about any of the people that just missed the top 10? You think that are interesting people?
That's basically us playing God, because we really don't know. You can't distinguish between number 10 and number 11, number 11 and number 12. I've always thought of the top 10 list as sort of the top 10, 20, 25. And then between 26 and 100, they're almost interchangeable. And we look at those, we just try to get the personalities in we think are worthy of that, but we don't rank them in such a way we're going to get shot the next day, which is.
Well, I'm always curious though. Always look. It's like the NFL draft. You always look to, they call Mr. Irrelevant, the last person drafted. So always look at number 100 on your list. And this year you have Alexei Kosov, who's with the San Francisco Chronicle, was with the Sacramento Bee. He's been on the Maddy Report numerous times. He's the one who broke the story on the French Laundry and the governor that really gave fuel to the recall move. He's fairly young though, very prolific, but he's fairly young. He's current president of the Sacramento Press Club. Is he next in the line of great Capitol reporters?
I think he's already there. And I think when we put him on the top 100 list, we had this sort of unwritten code that the number 100, we wanted to have a journalist. Because a lot of times they're not getting any exposure anywhere else except in big contests or big prizes. But we thought we're sort of
we have boots on the ground, and we have an idea of what good stories were, and we wanted to point those out to people who otherwise might not know about them. And definitely Alexei and the French Laundry story, that was something of a game changer in the
no question. That really did fuel the movement. Even though the numbers ended up kind of sagging there at the end of the opposite of the people that were supporting the recall. What about those that didn't make the list? And I ask you this every year. Those people that get upset. Do you get any phone calls from people that, hey, why wasn't I on the list, or why was I taken off the list? Anything you want to share? No names, please.
Yes, I do. I got a couple of nasty emails this time, and I don't engage those. I don't respond or try to justify the list, because really you can't. I mean, it's very subjective. But one person called the list despicable. Another person said, you guys are crazy. Another person said how much they liked the list, and they weren't on the list. I think they just want to make me feel good. We had a person that should have been on the list, and I won't tell you his name. It's a he. I won't tell you his name, but next year you'll find out, who did a lot of drafting of ballot initiatives. And I didn't learn that until too late in the process.
It is really interesting, though, for folks who are working in the Capitol to have this list. It's a very handy guide for folks. So when we come back, we're going to start delving into the top 10 most influential people in California politics. That conversation in a moment. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. So who are the 10 most powerful people in state politics that are unelected? We're talking with John Howard of Capital Weekly, who publishes an annual list of the behind-the-scenes power players in state politics. So number 10 is a pretty familiar name to many of us, Dee Dee Myers, who was the press secretary for Bill Clinton for 2 years. What's her role with the Newsom administration?
She's really in charge of what we're told. She's in charge of a program called California Roaring Back, which is sort of a very positive message on California business, on the economy coming back, bouncing back post-pandemic. She's a very good messenger, obviously, press secretary, as you mentioned, for the president. She's an author. She actually did a screen. I think she was an advisor on The West Wing, which was, I thought, an interesting show, at least if you're a Democrat. And in California, she had worked earlier on Tom Bradley's campaign, former LA mayor, gubernatorial candidate Tom Bradley. So she's really knowledgeable about California politics, and she's the one who has leaped the most from outside to a number 10. We've never had anybody make that kind of a change.
Yeah, it was interesting to know that she had worked with Bradley. I mean, she has been doing this I didn't realize how long she'd been doing this. Number 9 on your list is the governor's wife, Jennifer Seibel Newsom, or first partner, I think she likes to be referred to. Clearly plays an important role in the Newsom administration. But Ann Gust Brown played a very influential role in Jerry Brown's administration. Same, different?
I think they're different. I think Ann Gust Brown, as you said, played a very important role with the governor, actually organized, a guy who's largely unable to be organized, he struck me. Gave him political advice. I think when he was attorney general, Ann Gust Brown actually read briefs and commented on them and made suggestions. I don't think that Jennifer Seibel Newsom is in the same situation. Obviously, she's close to her husband, and they're a couple, and she's smart, and she's a documentary filmmaker, had been. So, but I don't see the same policy roots in her that I saw in Ann Gust Brown. And that would be the biggest difference for me.
Yeah, well, she has an MBA from Stanford, and so she's well educated and knowledgeable, and certainly a good person to bounce ideas off, I'm sure, for the governor, and that's why he relies on her, and that's why she's at number 9. Yeah. So let's go to number 8, and that's Ann Patterson, who's the governor's legal affairs secretary. Which, by the way, we're going to talk a little later on about the legislative affairs secretary, but this is the legal affairs secretary. What does she do, and why is she on the list?
Well, legal affairs secretary advises the governor on legal issues, court issues, facing the state, facing his administration. And, it's funny you focus on this, and we had a tough time with this one, but we wound up putting her at 8. She is clearly in the confidence of the governor. She's obviously knowledgeable about the law. Half of the last year more was taken up with litigation involving PG&E and the governor's and the administration's response to that, negotiating with PG&E over fiscal issues, wildfire issues. There's a big deal. So we think
that was a $1.9 billion deal. That was a pretty big negotiations. But then she jumped from there into the COVID situation and vaccinations and school closure, whatever, all those things.
Yeah, it's I think it's a Reporters Fair Play Act. It's Free Employment Act. I mean, she's done all kinds of stuff, and she got involved in a little bit of everything. And I think that's what Newsom wants in his advisor. Sometimes he appoints more than one advisor that gives him similar information. He likes to get a diversity of opinion.
Okay, well, let's go to number 7. Number 7 is Keeley Bossler. She's down from number 3 in the last 2 years. She was holding that ranking, so she's dropped a little bit. Maybe that's because she is with the state finance department. She directs it, and instead of having a budget deficit, we ended up with quite a large budget surplus of $38 billion. But she's still in the top 10, so it tells you something about budgets. Whether you have a surplus or a deficit, that's still something people are going to haggle over.
Yeah, that's still a problem. In fact, I've heard people in the Capitol very familiar with it say it's much tougher politically to deal with a surplus than it is, a deficit, because there's a lot going on there, and a lot of people want to get paid off. A lot of people want to get their programs protected. Keeley Bossler could have been 3, she could have been 7, could have been 10. We just think the finance department director needs to be in that top 10. She writes the governor's budgets. She's got a lot of help, but she is the principal fiscal officer in the state in terms of the administration. And she's the person people go to within the state to ask for money for their programs.
Yeah, so kind of important. He who has the gold, or she who has the gold makes the rules. Well, up next, we're going to talk about the remainder of the top 10 most influential unelected people in state politics. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Capital Weekly editor John Howard about the top 10 most influential people in state politics, those unelected folks in state politics. So the next group has some very interesting stories attached to them. Starting with number 6, Robbie Hunter. He heads the powerful States Building Construction Trades Council, an amalgam that represents 450,000 construction workers in California. He's moved up slightly from last year. He was number 8 last year, number 6 this year. Bottom line, he's a consistent top 10 player, but he's been in and out of the good graces of the governor.
Yeah, he's had his own battles with the governor over time. I think they've made up. Robbie Hunter is really interesting because you talk to other labor leaders, and they don't want to mess with Robbie either. I mean, he wields a lot of clout with the unions that his group is affiliated with building construction trades. As you mentioned, 450,000 workers. They're big players. Robbie also, by the way, is leaving. Could be as early as the end of this year or early next year. So he's retiring, but we kept him on the list because he was in place during the last few months, and he will continue to be in place.
Yeah, that's kind of a theme, because as we go to the next person, if you're wondering if this year's been tumultuous, just take a look what's happening, not just with Robbie, but our next one, our number 5 on the list. Perennial top 10 person who recently announced that she's stepping away from her position. We're talking about Maribel Batcher, the president of the California PUC, Public Utilities Commission. Last year, you said prophetically, she was on the hot seat. Congratulations, you called that. And she announced she's stepping down just after 1 year on the job of a 6-year term. She's stepping down. Kind of vague as to why she is stepping down. I think when you take a look at her placement on the list, it's really more about the position than the person.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. She's pretty amazing. She's been a troubleshooter. She was for Schwarzenegger. She has worked with Brown. She's obviously worked with Newsom. All of them, Republican and Democrat, seem to think that she really gets things done. She helped revamp the DMV when they needed it. She was put on the Public Utilities Commission, and you're right. I think I was right too. That is a hot seat, especially in an era when PG&E is having so many problems with sparked wildfires, issues relating to costs and rates and their own solvency. She's left, I think, a year into a 6-year term. It just is amazing to me that she did leave. I was very surprised. She seemed to be doing a stellar job. And I think government is less efficient because she'll be leaving.
Yeah, whoever takes her place, I'm guessing, is going to be, if not the top 10, top 20 on next year's list, because that's an important position. And by the way, I think it's becoming even more important with the advent of broadband and how that is just ubiquitous. It touches every part of your life. The pandemic has shown that, right? Whether it's telework, telemedicine, you name it, broadband is really important. And PUC has some jurisdiction in that.
They do, yeah. Their utilities include a lot more than public utilities, investor-owned utilities. You're right, broadband, telecommunications, railroads. There's a lot going on over there. That's a major, major state agency. It doesn't get a whole lot of coverage unless things are really bad for some reason, and then people focus on them. But day in and day out, they're a major outfit.
Yeah, no doubt. So number 4, you've got Mark Gailey, who's the California Secretary of Health and Human Services, who, by the way, follows in the footsteps of a Valley native, Diana Dooley, who held that position in the Jerry Brown administration. As a Secretary for Health and Human Services, obviously an important post. Just take a look at the state budget, and you know how important that post is, right? Huge section of the state budget, I think second only to education in terms of expenditures. Pandemic has only made this position more important, I would think.
That was our thought too. I thought the pandemic, first and foremost, made him an easy call for a good number on the list. He is the point person for the administration. He does briefings, does them by himself, does them with the governor, does them with others. He's a long-trained health officer, obviously. His wife, I think, is down in Los Angeles and is a major health official down there. The guy knows health from A to Z, and it's, I think, a pretty easy call to have him high on the list.
Yeah, and if you also take a look at these guys, this guy's credentials. I mean, dual degrees in biology and biomedical ethics from Brown, got an MD from Harvard. I mean, he's got the degrees for sure.
Yeah, that's a little better than my BA from San Diego State, but
hey,
not that much better.
We love the Cal State University system. So up next, we're going to focus on the top 3 most influential unelected folks in state politics. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Capital Weekly editor John Howard about the top 10 most influential unelected people in state politics. We're closing in on number 1. So holding down the 3rd most powerful position in California politics and state government is Angie Wee, who is the governor's legislative secretary, not to be confused with the governor's legal secretary, which we already spoke about. She stepped up from number 7 last year up to 3 this year. What can you tell us about her and her position?
Well, what we're told is no matter what the position is or even what the title is, she's a key political advisor to the governor. So as a legislative secretary, she keeps tabs on, guess what, the legislature, but she also spots trends. She knows what's going on out there in the hustings and the public domain and how it may affect the governor. That's what she advises on. She's got a heavy labor background. Obviously, she was with the California Labor Federation and a number of other positions. But whatever her title, she is a person who advises the governor on political issues, and she knows California politics.
Yeah, talking with the Labor Federation. He was with them for 20 years, 8 years as chief of staff. It just shows you the influence that unions have on California politics, even though nationwide, AFL-CIO doesn't have that influence on national politics, but in state politics, unions are still quite a potent force in the state capitol.
Let's talk about number 2 on the list. And the top 2 are familiar faces. Number 2 repeats as number 2 for the 3rd year in a row. She's a person who's been a fixture on state politics and government for years. Former finance director under Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Brown, someone who Governor Newsom has described as, quote unquote, a genius. That's Anna Santos, who's the governor's cabinet secretary. She oversees the executive branch, state agencies, chiefs, and acts kind of as an advisor to the governor on administering this humongous state bureaucracy. So what can you tell us about her?
Well, Ana Santos is, amazingly adept at running the bureaucracy, like you mentioned. That's basically what she does. She runs the people who run the bureaucracy. And she is the ranking person. She makes the trains run on time. She also used to be finance director. So she knows money. And she's worked under Republican and Democratic governors. And so has a bipartisan, she's Democrat, but she has a bipartisan aspect to her that I think is attractive to governors aside from her competence. So she's a person, I think, who knows the mechanics and the policy of government.
Yeah, and so everyone has a boss, right? So cabinet secretaries are reporting to her, and she reports to the governor, but she knows where the money is and where it's going. So you're not going to fool her in terms of, if you're a cabinet secretary asking for money, she knows how it works. So with knowledge comes power, and so I'm guessing she's pretty powerful in state government. But that leads us to a new number 1. Drum roll, please. And that's someone who replaced last year's number 1, Ann O'Leary, in the same position, and that is governor's chief of staff. His name is Jim Daboo. Meteoric rise. He was number 64 last year on your list.
Yeah,
wow, 64.
Kind of an amazing leap.
That's quite a jump.
But we can, so we do. So we just basically have fun doing it. But the thing was, the debate over this list really was between Ana Santos and Jim Daboo, who would be our number 1. This may sound trivial to the listening public, but for us, this is a big deal. Ana Santos had this amazing resume I'd mentioned, and it seemed to be the logical position. But then when we talked at the top of the show about the impact of the recall, this was an impact of the recall, because Jim Daboo, who has done advocacy, he's done campaigns, he's done fundraising, he's kind of done everything. He's worked in the building. He was the person brought in to advise the governor on the recall, or at least one of them. But that was his principle. He has a political gene, I think, that Ana may not have. And I think that's why at the end of the day, we asked a lot of people about this, and we put in Jim.
Yeah, it may be that over time, now that he's passed the recall, maybe that changes, and maybe the need, the skill set for the chief of staff changes, and therefore the chief of staff.
In fact, after the recall is gone, next year will be interesting. Who's the number 1 next year? One rumor we heard was that Dee Dee Myers was being groomed for that job. So we'll see.
That's pretty hard for me. She did advise. She was press secretary for one president. No impression here about whether Newsom's thinking of other job opportunities. But anyway, one quick thing before we go here, I wanted to ask you about, we've seen a lot of balance between men and women on your list. But what about minorities? How represented are they in the top 100? And do you see any new movers and shakers coming forward in the next few years we should be keeping an eye on?
In terms of minorities, in terms of African Americans, I think we had 2 or 3 on this year's list. In past years, we've had more than that. So we're not doing a good job there. We try to balance them as best we can and make sure we represent the state. But I think we are in terms of ethnicity. We have a sizable number of Latinos and whites. We have Asians, but not as many as we should have, clearly. I think part of that, go ahead.
No, I know we're running out of time, but I think, that obviously is going to change as you see more of them get involved in state politics. So I'm assuming the list is going to change next year. John, I want to thank you very much for being with us. John Howard with Capital Weekly with his always interesting top 100 list of the most important, influential, unelected people in California politics. Go ahead and read it.
And remember, you can trust us.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org. If you want to stay up to date on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.